Devil May Cry is great, right? I mean, the HD collection kicks ass, way worth the money, highly recommended piece of gaming history. But what even is Devil May Cry? I mean, yeah, there's a red dude with white hair and he kills demons with guns and his sword, but that's superficial. Like many franchises, Devil May Cry took a long time to find itself, and even longer to find its own main character. This is part 1 of my look back at the Devil May Cry franchise.
Let's rock, baby.
It came with fire and bullets and the promise of cool. The game doesn't contextualize itself much. Names get dropped, guns get shot. This whole intro sequence that Egoraptor hates so much, God bless him, makes little actual sense. The game doesn't mince words. You're meant to play it. What we know is that Dante kills demons, his mother was a human, his dad was an extremely powerful demon, and the Demon King Mundus is gonna do something, so we gotta stop him. This coming from Trish, who suspiciously looks like Dante's mother, destroys his property, attempts to kill him, then asks for help. Yeah, okay. Weirdly, Dante doesn't care about any of this, but he's shown in cutscenes to be nearly invincible, so really, why should he feel threatened by anything? That's enough scene setting. Devil May Cry is an odd game. It's the kind of game you think about after you stop playing, about how stupid that boss fight was, how ridiculous that mission is, and then 4 years and 3 playthroughs later, how maybe it'd be worth going back for another. Most games don't linger like DMC. I'm gonna be playing these games on their normal difficulties for reference. Presumably, those are the developer-intended legitimate DMC experience difficulties. I mean, not if you ask forums unhelpfully telling you how easy original American release PS2 DMC3 is, but I don't make a habit of asking advice from psychopaths. And let's get this straight right now. This game and this game aren't even remotely the same experience, okay? The original PS2 DMC is just brutal. Apparently Dante deals less damage, while the enemies deal 250% more. What? Not only that, but when you died, which was pathetically easy, you'd have to restart the whole level. The remasters fixed this issue, and I'm glad because it warps the first-time player experience so irreparably, it probably convinced a fair few people to quit, but I'll address those moments as they come up. So what did the developers think DMC was? I mean, aside from the aborted creative remainder of Resident Evil 4's development cycle, a hack-and-slash action game with a juggling mechanic and some special moves. All told, the gameplay is simple, shockingly simple. It's probably the game's biggest strength and detriment simultaneously. All of this simple gameplay takes place in cramped quarters at awkward camera angles and is mostly placed in the way of the player to add consequence to the missions, which mostly involves finding an object and bringing it to a location wherein you pick up a new object, and the cycle goes on until the game's done. It's a short game too, something like 3 to 4 hours if you're not dying. So Dante can do some things. He can slash 3 times, slash 5 times, make the bad guys Swiss cheese, dash and stab, uppercut, and additionally follow up with an automatic jump if desired, slam his sword down from midair, and that's it. That's the extent of Dante's sword moveset, and the inputs mostly extend completely to the other weapon he gets in the game. They let the player do all of this with one button. Oh great, catering to new players, huh? Oh, I can't beat Devil May Cry. Push Y! To get the ground combos to come out, you have to time the finishing button press, either immediately or after a short pause or after a breath. This mechanic carries throughout the franchise, and I've got to give him props. It encourages skill without making things complicated. You get another weapon later in the game, Ifrit or Ifrit, which will let you charge all your attacks up. I've never really gotten into it, but it's particularly useful for certain enemies and tasks. Right, the enemies. They're not too varied, they're not all that complicated, they usually come in packs, and when they don't, initially they will later. New players probably won't know that jumping gives you invincibility, which makes things 100 times more manageable. Some are tougher than others, but then that assumes that... What the fuck? Hey look, okay, stupid unfair design. No human is gonna have their hand on the lock-on button and dodge in time the first time. You just won't. This happens a couple of times in the game, and you wouldn't notice it on the normal difficulty in the remaster, because it doesn't completely screw you. You won't notice it ever again, because you'll always be ready. But in the original PS2 difficulty, it's a gigantic morale killer. Not only is the game openly disrespecting you, which let's be honest, it's literally sucker punching you, but it does so much damage, and you're probably gonna die, and probably gonna have to restart the whole mission. This is the stuff I was referring to. A lot of DMC is straight up easy. I blew through this last playthrough because I beat it twice on hard mode with no immediate power-ups previously. In fact, DMC has a ton of difficulties because it encourages the player to play through multiple times. Combat's fun and addictive and the game's short, so why not? So the issues like being annoyed, trying to figure out where this item is, and where to put it vanish. You start discovering secret mini-missions. The game gets easier. It's a great feeling. Anyway, we were talking about weapons. Guns also come come into play, but I've never really been a fan. I mean, they're probably at their best in the first 2 iterations of the game, but they still do really pitiful damage and hurt your wrist from rapid presses. What is steal? They let you juggle enemies you've knocked into the air, but I can't help but wonder why you'd ever bother when you're surrounded, and if you're alone, why you wouldn't just knock him down and start a new combo proactively, right? I mean, there are other guns, but I only get use out of the shotgun with those gross scissor ghosts. Finally, Dante can turn into a demon, powering him up with Devil Trigger. Devil Trigger is overpowered in this game. On normal and even hard mode at least, it trivializes most of the encounters with no risk involved. The gauge fills up nice and quick with guns, further padding your own pillow fortress of lightning bolts. I can't be Devil May Cry! Push X! Both Ifrit and Alistair, the lightning sword, have different Devil Trigger moves, but I've only ever bothered leveling Alistair's up, and for a very specific reason. You may have noticed that I have biases for different weapons and methods of gameplay, and that's because Devil May Cry is ingenious for allowing players to choose how to approach most encounters in the game. There is no default angle of approach for combat except, you know. But that was a player-made decision. DMC isn't some validation simulator like Legend of Zelda where you fit the blocks into the holes. Every slash, jump, and gunshot is a player-chosen expression, which means you have to be good. You have to shoulder the burden of Dante's invincible status. It's empowering. I know this isn't new in games, and the Zelda thing isn't even a design flaw, but player expression is something I value. The puzzles in this game are just a means to an end anyway, fighting the bosses and getting to Mundus. Speaking of empowerment, what the fuck is this? You know, I genuinely don't get it. When people talk about Devil May Cry, I swear, everybody forgets that this character has virtually no style in this game. His moveset is almost too simple, and he can only carry one weapon at a time. Therefore, the potential for variance in his combos is minimal. That should not be a controversial statement. But Dante can do some extremely impressive things in the later games, and it casts a bit of a shadow on this one. Hear me out. This guy is the guy doing all this crazy shit in these cutscenes, but realistically, getting an A or an S in style in this game is a matter of continuously hitting an opponent, not doing it stylishly. It's prototypical, so I'm not gonna harp on it long, but this game shows its age sometimes. Sometimes, it feels like a demo for a bigger concept. At least it laid the foundations, right? Continuing that thought, the strangest thing about this franchise and its fan base is that people have this conception, this notion that Dante's always been this snarky, hilarious, free-spirited badass with a flair for the dramatic.
It's like, he's overly cool. I just hate over-cool characters. I think they're dumb. Fucking Dante's like stupid. It's like, there's like a fucking giant spider that comes out and he's like, heh, looking hot. And it's like, fuck you. Just be scared for a sec.
But Dante in the first 2 games is a monotone, uncharismatic plank. You know, with the hardware they had to work with, it's no wonder, and the sound mixing really isn't that great, but that ain't Dante. That's like level 1 Dante.
Dante!
Don't come any closer, you devil! You may look like my mother, but you're nowhere close to her. You have no soul. You have the face, but you'll never have her fire!
And then there's the scene this game is infamous for.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
If by soul you mean pussy and by light you mean semen. Boss fights. Oh my god. If you're playing the original PS2 version, I don't know why you'd bother with this game, because some of the bosses are tough. Some are just outright obnoxious and others are fine, but better fought first on normal difficulty. You fight them each 3 times. 3 times! And they get a little different each time. Sure, okay, but it gets tedious, you know? The spider comes back like 5 times because he chases you down a hallway twice, so that's fun, and he goes and kills himself. And the bird! This guy's mostly damaged by guns and Devil Trigger, rip my wrists. And Mundus kills him. This ooze is just the worst. You gotta keep this glyph lit by hitting him, and then he opens his weak spot, and sometimes he'll suck you up, and you have to fight one of the bosses you've already killed 100 times. Only fight I used items on, and we don't talk about items in Devil May Cry. Not to mention the part where he spikes you off camera. Very fucking fun. And Nero Angelo, or Nello Angelo if you prefer. Nero Angelo is one of the most obnoxious battles I've ever fought. Hey, don't get me wrong, I one-shot him on my recent playthrough each time, but that's because I've done the 3rd fight over 80 times on hard mode. And this is where players probably start looking things up and whoops, the game broke! This fight is so annoying I looked up strategies and came across a combo reset where you input 2 slashes, do a full circle motion, and the game resets down Dante's position, giving him enough time to repeat the maneuver and cancel it again infinitely. DMC has abusable tech like Smash Bros. Melee. I don't know if I should be grateful or just fucking scream. I wish there were more bosses, you know? Variance is key. It's why I say this game feels like a prototype. I don't know who thought it was a good idea, but DMC ends on a stupid, out-of-the-blue, Star Fox-esque battle, then on a normal combat section where the only opposition mostly is the environment, then on a hokey, self-indulgent cutscene with Dante sending Mundus back to hell like a dumbass, and finally on a vehicular escape scene where the island blows up. This is why we don't pay attention to story in Devil May Cry. It wants to be an action movie, not a moving narrative. The drama in gameplay during these moments is palpable, but I would certainly never opt to end my hack-and-slash game with abnormal flying sections. To be perfectly honest, the game slides pretty easily into my top 20 because it's so fun. If you get the chance, give it a try. But not the next one. Now for Devil May Cry 2. Armed with an incredible new IP, the developers tragically suffered a crippling bout of dementia, forgetting 90% of what made Devil May Cry fun and interesting. Hold the phone, KBash! I hear the seasoned Devil May Cry NeoGAF posters say, DMC2 actually gets too much hate on account of they put in the Bloody Palace, where you fight waves of enemies that became a series staple concept. Also, they let you swap weapons with a mere button press, a technical marvel, KBash. You also get an extra wall running ability, and so the game is awesome now. I'm not convinced anyone who's actually played this game can hold this opinion, but if you do, get it together. There's lots to hate about this game, and I'm not too keen to spend 10 years on it because it doesn't warrant the attention, but here's the rundown. The story is trash, of course, but instead of taking place in modern times in a weird gothic castle, it troublingly mixes neon lights, city streets, and yes, gothic architecture into a muddy soup of aesthetics. Somehow DMC has always kept this from this game on, but does better with each iteration. Apparently the designers thought Dante was too lighthearted in the previous game, presumably because a young Egoraptor called them up and screamed at them mercilessly, even though Dante cracked only 3 to 4 jokes throughout and smiled like one time. And now Dante is a brooding, sullen, competent swordsman archetype character who people ask for help, and he just flips a coin and he's all, guess it's your lucky day. Shut the fuck up, you stupid dumb idiot. His coin's double-sided anyway, he just does that to look cool. Very pretentious. The combat has somehow regressed. You get 3 swords, and they're only different by the numbers and rages. I didn't bother at all. Some old moves are intact, but they killed the button timing system for some reason. Definitely unhelpful. Thank you, Capcom. Why use swords when guns are overpowered, though? Hey, look, they do big damage, and you can juggle opponents just by shooting them. Sorry, start a juggle by shooting. Oh my god. Devil Trigger is immensely overpowered, though slightly harder to generate, but when you have it, it's like Dante gets machine gun hands. They don't even have a chance. They don't even have a chance. It's just a fucking instant win button. Your dodge move is relegated to a single button press, unlike the last game, but the same button lets you run up a wall or on it. But I never figured out why I needed to do this or why it would ever be useful, so I didn't bother. Enemies are basically a non-issue in this game. Their AI is so bad. I'm not exaggerating when I say a child could beat this game. Maybe having difficulty on 1 or 2 bosses. The story is split between 2 characters, Dante and... Capcom, what is that? Stark scarlet hair on pure white with mega tan skin? What were you thinking? Her story is infinitely better because she's not inherently as overpowered as Dante is. I actually enjoyed her section of the game. It felt like it had meaningful limitations on guns mostly, and the combos were longer and more satisfying to hit, I guess. They fight the same bosses at different intervals. Some of these bosses just roll over instantly, and others are straight up annoying, but none of them are very hard. Certainly nothing like the first game's bosses, which felt multifaceted and interesting. I particularly dislike the fish and the off-screen helicopter boss. Are you serious? Are you fucking serious, guys? That isn't game design. Oh my god. I have to give it some credit, though. It's home to one of the best cutscenes in the entire franchise. Just indulge me for 20 seconds.
My dream, my life. I was going to be the king of this world. King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
So it turns out you're the evil. You're dead. I feel terrible about this game because Dante looks awesome. I wanted to play it and didn't get the hate, but trust me, play this game to die instantly. If there's a fan out there who likes this, I'm assuming they started on it, or they're just really tolerant, or they're just not very critical, and really the less said the better. You just don't fuck with DMC3. I may love the first installment of the franchise a lot, but in most ways, this game towers high above the first. If you get the chance, play it. Right from the beginning, you know you're in for an experience. From the absolutely ridiculous opening cutscene, to Dante riding a missile, to driving up a falling section of a tower, the cutscenes lend massive entertainment value to a previously restrained affair, especially after DMC2. It's like the designers couldn't figure out what to do with Dante from the last game, so they dialed the timeline back a bit and made a prequel, which cleverly let them keep the original snarky Dante and max his personality out with the fire of youth. He's brash, impulsive, stupid, but always interesting to watch. The combat system opens up massively in this ituration, with the sword mechanics from the first game intact, a bunch of crazy elemental weapons that give you new tools to approach any situation, a number of guns I barely used. Devil Trigger is intact, and it builds from dealing damage, so it ends up being a reward more than a pure resource management win button thing, and you can't just steamroll everything anymore. And finally, the style system. To make it quick, you get one of 4 styles that focus on a different element of gameplay, and they dedicate the B button to it, so it becomes part of your core gameplay. I like weapon combos, so I went with Swordmaster, and I don't really want to play without it, to be honest. There's a question of what style is best, but the breakdown is pretty easy. Trickster enhances your dodging ability, which is great, but you can't do air combos as much, so I don't want it, and jumping and rolling is just fine. Don't pick Gunslinger. Also, Royal Guard is really great if you like being reactive instead of proactive, and you're already a god at the game.
Look, you don't really need to be some action game deity to play Royal Guard. KBash is just too impatient to wait for the enemies to hit him instead of the other way around. Come child, let me show you the ways of Royal Guard. There's 2 major hurdles you have to overcome when learning to Royal Guard efficiently. Number 1 is switching your mindset from offense to defense. With Royal Guard, you have little to no mobility, you're a tower, and nothing can move you if you know your shit. The main difficulty with this style is getting it through your thick Canadian skull that B is a block that can tank literally any hit, even from bosses, if you know their frames. That ties into the second hurdle, observation. Efficient use of Royal Guard requires a lot of patience and some pretty good timing. You'll need to carefully study enemies' attack animations and figure out when you can block perfectly for maximum adrenaline gain. Adrenaline, in other words, is a charging mechanic represented by the glowing orbs next to your health bar, which gauges how strong your Royal Release will be, which is the most damaging move in the game. In addition to that, Royal Guard has some pretty unique tech tied to it. You can cancel a lot of animations with the block, one of the most common uses being slash canceling, allowing you to restart your Rebellion combo after the first 2 hits, giving your damage output more flexibility for evasion and defense. I won't tell you about the other ways you can cancel your recovery frames, since discovering them and working that tech into your playstyle is some of the most fun I've had with Royal Guard, but now you should go and listen to the bitter Canadian man keep talking about his beta Swordmaster experience. Go, shoot. Out of here.
The beauty of Swordmaster is, at least for anyone who started with the 4th game, your aerial combat options are finally unlocked. If you've been playing through the franchise, you know how little aerial combat was actually allowed. Now you're juggling dudes like it's a circus act. My favorite part of the game is the weapon system. You unlock all these weapons, and they don't have a ton of moves to unlock, so you don't need to grind your life away to buy moves or anything. You can swap between them when you need them or want to try a new strategy, but you only get 2 at a time. This is the perfect number of weapons for Dante. Change my mind. In DMC4, for example, as a novice, I found myself swapping between 3 weapons and guns and just drowning in dropped inputs and chaos. There is no chaos in DMC3. It's just pure visceral action, stylish combos, and tactically using what weapons complement each other. Not to mention it's a form of player expression, so it gets a point in my book by virtue of existing. You get the feeling of this weapon is my signature weapon, you know? The enemies feel more vigorous this time around. There were different kinds everywhere. They did a lot of different things. I had to adapt on the fly a bunch. Some were weak to different weapons. The game really captures that feeling of exploration and experimentation without punishing you for picking the wrong thing. Like trying to fight Frosts in DMC1 with Alistair. I've neglected to mention it thus far, but when you combo well, you get rewarded with more of those red orbs, so the game rewards skill, which might make the discerning viewers say, huh, so they reward people who are already ahead and kick the shitty player while they're down? And yeah, I mean, DMC isn't gonna hold your hand. It can be a little disheartening, especially when learning a game, but it goes away with time. Another thing that goes away with practice is traversal. I'm gonna say it, the game's great, but figuring out where to go and where to put what item is somehow worse than DMC1. Did I say somehow? I meant because of this. The map is way bigger than before, and there's a lot of stuff to do. Overall, it's a minor frustration, but the worst example is this section where you have to understand that this pit you couldn't cross. Suddenly you can cross it because an item you pick up has a clue that says, the essence of a powerful and fearless soul. Its possessor need not fear hell nor oblivion. What? How does that indicate that you can walk on air and only here and nowhere else? Regardless, the game's little issues disappear with repeat playthroughs as expected. However, if you were unfortunate enough to play and beat the original DMC on the PS2, you're a certified genius, extremely competent, laden with free time, and an absolute fucking sociopath. The original DMC3 is the hardest game I've ever played, and I'm shocked my controller is still intact. Play the remake, unless you like dying 50 times to some of the bosses in this game and restarting the entire mission each time for it. Like, don't get me wrong, the remake is plenty hard, but only the bosses can really trip you up. This is the game that defined boss fighting in Devil May Cry. The past games tried, but either failed miserably or relied on repetition. DMC3 packs a boss for every weapon and then some. These fights all have unique mechanics, like having to clear the ice from the head of the Cerberus, giving you a free opportunity to use the shotgun in a boss fight. Or instead of playing passively, actively mashing this dude's face, pecs with your nunchucks because it'll parry their attacks. How about exploiting elemental weaknesses to get extra damage? Or blinding this dude by smacking his good eye. The boss fights are all really memorable, and perhaps it's because the bosses have identity, not character per se, but they do certain things that annihilate you and other things you dodge easily, and you get a sense for what their behaviors are and how you interact with them through play. It sounds obvious, and it is, but the game rewards you with a tangible feeling of growth. Suddenly, you're the one whooping the game's ass and not the other way around. Are you fucking kidding me? Virgil is Dante's brother and resident fuckass who needs to be dethroned from his high horse ASAP. Don't get me wrong, I sympathize with this character enough, but goddamn they're good at making you hate him. He's present from the start, looking down on you. He's shown to be stronger than you. You can never really kill the guy. He steals a weapon intended for the player and then uses it against you? You're laughing at me, aren't you, Capcom? The other relevant character is Lady, the single coolest character in the game. Just, like, Dante and Virgil are both half demon. What's her excuse? She's relevant because plot, whatever, I'm not getting into it, but her dad's a shithead and a jester, and you've gotta kill him. The only problem is they have the combined power of the Matrix and cringe combined into one being.
Jester's gonna spank your butt, spank you on the...
Jesus. This whole ridiculous plot, which, like, people have been like, oh, the writing is good. No, the plot itself is dramatic enough to pass in an action game and nothing else. This whole plot culminates in just, like, what's with games tanking their credibility at the end? You have to do a boss rush at the end, like a Mega Man game, which, as far as I'm concerned, it's fine in the remake and unacceptable in the original purely because dying would mean restarting the rush. Then there's the worst boss fight, where the game takes away your style button, so because I used Swordmaster, I lost a ton of moves I'd gotten used to and got a garbagey companion for it. No, I don't care that Virgil and Dante are putting their differences aside. This is annoying. And the last fight with Virgil, ugh. To be fair, I'm an idiot for bringing the electric guitar into the fight, but goddamn. At the very least, it's a fitting send-off. Virgil in the first fight loses to jumping and running in basic combos. Here, he's not going down until you learn everything about him. It's tough, it's frustrating, and it gives you the chance to use everything you've gained so far against a worthy opponent. I gotta give them credit for finally weaving gameplay and story together in a meaningful way. In the end, Capcom found Devil May Cry. They established a formula, started in one game, and perfected in another. The franchise had nothing to lose going forward if they kept to their guns, so to speak. But that's not what happened, is it? Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video, and I hope you look forward to watching my second video on Devil May Cry. Don't forget to check out Atmos Fabula, who I've worked with in the past. He does informative game review content. Check him out in the description below.